and although the doctors tried their best, she passed away. It was so incredibly devastating, especially when my Uncle Terry and grandparents made an appearance at the funeral. They were smiling from ear to ear and were loving seeing that Chantrell had passed away. Nathan did his best to ignore them, but then Uncle Terry went up and tried to take a selfie next to the open casket, and Uncle Nathan couldn't hold back his frustrations anymore. Fueled with rage, he ran over and smashed Terry's phone and then proceeded to punch him until he was unconscious. The police had to show up to break up the fight, but luckily no one pressed charges against each other and everyone was allowed to go home. Hi there, my name is Morris and I wish to share with you the story of how I became the owner of a very successful company. I do need to explain a few things first though, so you can better understand what I mean by that though. For starters, my family doesn't have a great history of being very open-minded. Back when my father and his two brothers were in their 20s, the three of them were trying to figure out who they were. My father was the most successful as he managed to not only find a job as an accountant for a large firm, but he also met my mother shortly after doing so. A year later, my Uncle Nathan came home with a woman that he had started dating, and at the time, he had wanted to introduce her to the family, as he was thinking about proposing to her. The second that my other Uncle Terry and my grandparents saw her, however, they lost their minds. You see, my Uncle Nathan had fallen in love with a black woman by the name of Chantrell, and my father and mother were the only members of my family to accept them. Both my grandparents and my Uncle Terry started yelling at Chantrell and called her all kinds of racist names.
How dare you come to our house and dirty it with your presence? Nathan, I always knew you were an idiot, but to date a black person, that's just a whole new level of stupid. Your brother is right. I demand that you break up with this inferior woman right this instant. How dare you treat Chantrell like that? This is the woman I love, and you have no right to speak to her like that. If you don't start acting right, then I'll disown you.
My Uncle Nathan tried to argue on behalf of Chantrell and himself, but my Uncle Terry wasn't having any of it. They got into a fist fight, and after that day, my Uncle Nathan walked away and swore that he would never forgive his family. Thankfully, his relationship with my father remained good, as my father and mother were the only ones that did not see anything wrong with Nathan dating a woman of a different race. In fact, they were just happy that he had found love. Years passed, and I was born, and my father and mother had to live dual lives. On one hand, they wanted to love and support my grandparents and my Uncle Terry, but on the other, they still loved Nathan and Chantrell, who had gotten married. It was difficult for them, but they made do. My father's accounting skills ended up being put to good use, as Nathan and Chantrell were excellent at investing money into companies and finding ways to make them profitable. They had acquired more than a handful of different companies over the years. Some factories, restaurants, and even some computer programming firms. They had a knack for hiring amazing managers that kept the businesses running smoothly. As I got older, I learned that my aunt and uncle had tried to have a child of their own, but my aunt had a miscarriage and was unfortunately unable to have children after that. I can't imagine how painful it must have been for them, but after that, they began to treat me as if I was one of their own children. They spoiled me rotten, and when I got older, my uncle took me under his wing and showed me the ropes of their various businesses. Surprisingly, I was able to pick up a lot of hard lessons from him and like him and my aunt. I appeared to have a knack for seeing the profitability of a business fairly quickly. It did feel weird to keep my relationship with my Aunt Chantrell and Uncle Nathan a secret from the rest of the family, but my father insisted that it was for the best, as they would never understand, and he didn't want me to be disowned like they had done to Nathan. Personally, I didn't care if they did. After all, I couldn't understand how a family could do something so horrible to a fellow family member. Just as I was about to attend college, my Aunt Chantrell became very sick, and although the doctors tried their best, she passed away. It was so incredibly devastating, especially when my Uncle Terry and grandparents made an appearance at the funeral. They were smiling from ear to ear and were loving seeing that Chantrell had passed away. Nathan did his best to ignore them, but then Uncle Terry went up and tried to take a selfie next to the open casket, and Uncle Nathan couldn't hold back his frustrations anymore. Fueled with rage, he ran over and smashed Terry's phone and then proceeded to punch him until he was unconscious. The police had to show up to break up the fight, but luckily no one pressed charges against each other and everyone was allowed to go home. After that, Uncle Nathan took me aside and had some words with me.
Hey Morris, listen, I need to talk to you about something. I know that you are only in college, but I want you to start thinking about your future. You see, just like your aunt, I won't always be here, and since I have no children of my own, I want to leave my businesses to you. Is that something that you would be interested in?
Of course, Uncle Nathan. It would be an honor to continue your legacy. But that isn't for many, many years from now, though. At least that's what I thought. But after my aunt passed away, my Uncle Nathan had lost the will to live. He had loved her so much that he really let his health go, and only a few years after my aunt passed away, Uncle Nathan did as well. It was such a strange thing. The doctors were puzzled, but thought that maybe he had an untreated brain tumor and passed away in his sleep. But my parents and I knew that it was from a broken heart. Without Chantrelle, he had lost the will to live and couldn't imagine a life without her. A week after his funeral, the whole family met at my Uncle Nathan's lawyer's office. My grandparents, my parents, my uncle and I were there, along with Chantrelle's sister and her daughter. The office felt very crowded, but thankfully the reading of the will didn't take very long. The lawyer read it and announced that Chantrelle's sister and niece would receive a very large sum of money, as well as a lake house that my aunt and uncle had owned. My parents would receive enough money to pay off their house, as they always supported Nathan and Chantrelle. As for me, my aunt and uncle left me all of their businesses, as well as enough money to run them for several years, so that I could have plenty of time to learn how to run them efficiently. My grandparents and uncle were furious. They had expected to get something as well and couldn't understand why they had been excluded. Later, after we were back at my grandparents' house, my uncle approached me.
Hey Morris, listen, you're way too young to be able to handle all those businesses on your own.
I don't think that I agree with you. I'm almost done with college, and Uncle Nathan has been preparing me for this for a long time.
That idiot didn't know what he was talking about. Look at how he debased himself by marrying a black woman. He could have married a beautiful white woman and had carried on the family name, but instead, he wasted his life with an inferior woman.
How can you say that about him or about Aunt Chantrelle? She was an amazing woman.
Oh, now he has you saying stupid stuff too. Chantrelle wasn't even human. You would do yourself well to never get mixed up with someone who isn't white. At any rate, just give it some thought. It's only fair that you share the wealth with the rest of the family after all.
His words angered me so much, and so I just stormed off. Honestly, how could you allow your heart to be so full of hate? It was so incredibly disgusting. I especially found it funny that he had expected my Uncle Nathan to have children and carry on the family name, because every woman that my Uncle Terry approached were instantly disgusted by him. Hence, why my father and Uncle Nathan were so important to have children. At any rate, I did my best to try to ignore his foolish comments and just focus on taking over Uncle Nathan's businesses. When then, an idea came to me. As I went over the various companies that Uncle Nathan owned, I saw a tech company that did not fit in with the rest. I instantly knew what I needed to do with it, and so I called up my Uncle Terry. Hey, Uncle Terry. I may have been hasty the other day, and I wanted to apologize to you and to show you that there are no hard feelings. I wanted to make a great offer to you.
Oh yeah? Well, go ahead. Let's hear it. I don't have all day.
Well, I can't just give you a company, but I do have one that shows a lot of potential, and I can sell it to you for $70,000. All you have to do is buy it from me and take on the ownership, and you'll be made a millionaire practically overnight.
Is that so? What's the catch?
No catch. The pay is just for legal purposes. Honestly, there are so many companies to keep track of that you'll be doing me a huge favor. That company made over $1 million in profit last year, and I know that you'll do good things with it.
Well, shoot. Okay, you have yourself a deal. I knew that you would come around and see things our way.
I did in fact not see things their way. But I needed him to take the bait, and he did. Hook, line, and sinker. The truth was that there was a really huge problem with the company, but I wasn't going to tell my uncle anything of the sort. And after my lawyer took care of all the paperwork and passed off the ownership of the company to my uncle, I had to stifle a laugh as we shook on the deal. The fool thought he was going to be rich beyond his dreams, but he had bought nothing but his own doom. You see, the year before the company was incredibly profitable, but they had invested all their profit and had taken out massive loans to cover their expenses. Unfortunately, this year had been devastating to them, and only some very good or miraculous leadership could right that ship and make them not go bankrupt. And my Uncle Terry was most certainly not that person. 2 months after I sold him the company, I had finished up college and was putting in a lot of work and effort to learn the ropes of how to manage all the various businesses that I had inherited. It was a lot of difficult work and late nights with little sleep, but as the weeks passed, I found it easier and easier to manage. The more I got to know the various general managers and managers in general, the more I could trust them to handle more tasks, and things began to really run smoothly. As for my uncle, though, he was struggling to keep things afloat, and he called me up to complain and give crap.
You sold me a lemon. You knew that they were in financial ruin and you lied and told me that they would make me rich.
I did nothing of the sort. I told you that they were profitable last year. Honestly, with a very good leader, they could have continued to be profitable, but you are too stupid to know how to do that. Chantrell, however, would have been able to. I guess that makes you inferior human after all. It's almost as if the color of someone's skin doesn't matter at all. But the contents of their brain do, and yours is clearly empty. Sorry that you have buyer's remorse, but you're stuck with them.
No, Morris, please. I need your help. Can't you buy the company back? Or maybe loan me some money so I can get it going and maybe try to become profitable again?
Why would I do that?
If you don't, then I'll be ruined. You know that when I bought the company that I took over their debt. If they go bankrupt, it will ruin me. I'll never be able to pay back all the money that they owe. Please help me.
I chose to ignore him, after all. This had been my plan all along. A few weeks passed, and my uncle was forced to liquidate the company and to declare bankruptcy. He was right. He owed so much money that there was no way that he could ever earn enough money to pay off all that debt. It would take him 10 lifetimes in order to do so. In the end, he was so depressed that he took his own life. Deep down, I did feel guilty, but after the way he and my grandparents had treated Chantrell and Nathan, I felt that it was a bit justified. As for my grandparents, Terry had been their primary caregiver as they were unable to live on their own anymore. My parents ended up putting them in a home full of black caregivers as they had no desire to live with them, as they were even more racist than my Uncle Terry had been. So my grandparents were treated horribly and were constantly calling and asking my parents to take them back home, but they refused. I'm sure they wished to die than stay there. Did my parents do a bad thing? Some of you might think I'm exaggerating when I say this, but I'd rather take my orphanage back than Aunt Nancy ever again. Sure, the children's home was physically abusive, but Nancy was cruel in both the physical and emotional way. She would try to avoid me as much as possible, even though she was my literal guardian. And whenever she did decide to interact with me, it wasn't pleasant. Hi everybody, I'm Mateo, and I have quite a fun story to tell everybody. This is the story on how I got revenge on my aunt, who treated me absolutely horribly. I still have no regrets about what happened to her. I'll just get right to it now. So I'm from a country in South America. I grew up in a home for kids since my parents had died when I was young. The workers always neglected everyone's basic needs and hit us often. I still have scars from the amount of times they lashed out on me. One day, these missionaries from America visited our region, and a couple that was on the trip came by and wanted to adopt me. So, through a lot of legal procedures, I became a US citizen, and I was flown out of my home country. It was a very hard change for me now, because I was already 9 when my new parents adopted me. I had to learn English, which was difficult and even more embarrassing, since everyone else around me has spoken English for their entire lives. There were also quite the cultural differences which I had to adjust to, and having parents now in general was something I had to quickly get used to. Luckily, my new parents were extremely patient and kind with me, which I was grateful for. We made many memories together, but again, my mom and dad passed away 5 years later. They were killed instantly as a result of a car crash, which absolutely devastated me. I was then sent to live with my Aunt Nancy, who was my dad's sister. Some of you might think I'm exaggerating when I say this, but I'd rather take my orphanage back than Aunt Nancy ever again. Sure, the children's home was physically abusive, but Nancy was cruel in both the physical and emotional way. She would try to avoid me as much as possible, even though she was my literal guardian. And whenever she did decide to interact with me, it wasn't pleasant.
Hey, Matt.
See?
Don't say that stupid word. You're in America. Speak English.
Sorry, Auntie.
God, my brother really made the worst decision when it came to having a kid. He's adopted, not even from this country, ugly and stupid. I was fine with it as long as I didn't have to deal with it, but now my brother has to just die and leave me this thing to look over.
Sorry, Auntie.
Can you shut up and trim the bushes already? I'm tired of your weird accent.
Mom and Dad.
Mom and Dad, my ass. I'm not your mommy, Mateo. You're not even purely part of the family, so I will treat you as such.
Nancy would constantly comment on my accent and basically anything that was identifiable to my culture. She hated my curly hair and would make me cut it short so it was straighter. She also grimaced at my tanned skin tone, and according to her, I shouldn't go outside much since I was brown enough. Also, my aunt would beat me a lot for either no reason or one that doesn't even make any sense. She noticed that I would get scared if she ever held up slippers or a belt and used this to her advantage.
Mateo, do you think the length of this belt is too long?
It's fine.
Oh, don't tell me you're scared of a belt, are you? I'm gonna have so much fun scaring you.
Please. Please don't. Nancy?
Come on, don't be such a wimp.
The fact that Aunt Nancy was making fun of my past trauma was pretty aggravating. I tried hard to let her off the hook with every new thing she did or said, and it was becoming increasingly hard to not yell back at her as the years went on. She even berated me in front of my friends from school.
You've been living here for like 7 years now. Why is your accent still so terrible?
Sorry, I've been practicing a lot.
Well, obviously your Spanish friends you have with you are keeping you from talking normally.
Auntie Nancy, stop saying that.
So are you denying my First Amendment rights now? I can't freely say what I believe?
No, but by this point, I was so done with my aunt. I apologized to my friends, and my head boiled with anger as I thought about all that Nancy had said. One day, Nancy took me to my grandparents' place since she had some sort of salon appointment. I had visited them almost every week with my parents, but ever since living with Nancy, I'd see them only about 6 times a year. Grandpa and Grandma were some of the sweetest people that I'd ever met, and I knew that I could tell them anything. So I began to complain to them about everything that I'd been going through at home with Nancy. I went into tiny details ranging from her racist remarks and distaste towards adoptees to the manual labor she forced me to do. When I was finally done ranting about my situation, both of my grandparents were fuming in absolute fury.
Mateo, I promise we will help you. We have a lot of secrets we've been keeping, but I think it'll come to our advantage now.
Honey, I assure that Nancy will never lay a finger on you again.
Thank you. My grandparents soon revealed some shocking secrets about their life, and they were right. I really could use a lot of the stuff as weapons against my evil aunt. The next time Nancy started acting incredibly arrogant to me again, I knew it was the perfect time to work out my revenge. Aunt Nancy, is it okay if I go to the park with my friends for one of their birthdays?
I really wish your birthday could come. Then I could just kick you out already, filthy immigrant boy.
Well, I think you're the one that should be kicked out.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, don't Grandpa and Grandma own this house? I think they have all the right to be able to kick someone like you out.
What in the hell is a stupid kid like you talking about?
Well, you've acted very horribly to me for the past 3 years by insulting my culture, my appearance, and the fact that Mom and Dad had adopted me. And I know now that you don't even own this house because your parents paid for every penny.
That's not true. Stop lying. I'll call them right now.
I watched as Nancy quickly dialed my grandparents' number, and my grandma picked up. Nancy began to yell about how I was a complete liar who was just trying to embarrass and humiliate her in front of everyone I knew.
Mom! Your so-called grandson keeps trying to assault me and claims that you bought my house. Mommy, tell him it's not true. Hurry! Just calm down now. We're almost at your door. Sweetheart, you know it's true. Mom? What? No, I paid for it, Mom.
Stop pretending. We wrote the check for the whole house. Nancy, it's time to also reveal the fact that you're adopted. Go ahead. Tell Mateo that you're adopted.
Dad, how can you just betray me like this?
How do you think it's right that you can just emotionally and physically hurt an adoptee from simply being loved by people other than their biological parents? We've loved you for all of your life. So how would you feel if we treated you so horribly like you have treated Mateo?
I've always been so nice to him. I'm your daughter and he's not. What a hypocrite. If he's not your brother's son, then you're not our daughter. It's time to get out of the house. But Mom, don't make me call the cops on you. We've removed you from our will and Mateo will be receiving all of our inheritance after we pass. This isn't fair. This isn't fair. I'm gonna kill you, Mom.
With that, Nancy lunged at my grandma angrily. She hit the ground, and I quickly was able to pry my aunt off of her and restrain her while Grandpa called the police. The police very quickly showed up and made sure that my grandma was okay from being pushed onto the floor. Luckily, my grandma only ended with a sore hip. On the other hand, Nancy was completely kicked out of the house and also charged with assault and resisting arrest, since she'd kicked the cops multiple times before being tased and forced into the police car. I'm not sure what happened to her, since my grandparents dealt with all of the illegal technicalities, but it's been a few years, and I haven't seen or heard from my aunt. Grandma and Grandpa gifted me Nancy's home, and I was ecstatic at this news. I did rent the house out for a few years when I went to college. I've just come home from university, and my grandparents are still doing very well. They say they have no regrets on what they did since every child deserves to have love, and she just didn't understand that. Thanks for listening.